Administrative matters, item 23, discussion and appropriate action on remaining special pay code designations presented by Executive Director Dominic Brown, General Counsel Jennifer Zari, and the Administrative Committee. Recommendation is to approve designations, take other action as appropriate.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Dominic, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Before I start, I'd like to do a quick audio check on Ashley and make sure that we can hear her. Ashley, can we hear you? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay, we can hear you too. So good. So I just want to briefly introduce this item, and then I'm going to hand it over to Jennifer and to Ashley. So as your board knows, we have been working diligently evaluating all of the special pay codes. At the last meeting of your board, some of the codes were what we call mixed use codes, and there was some lack of clarity, so your board referred them to the administrative committee. The administrative committee did meet and heard presentation and evaluated all of these special pay codes and did approve them and is now recommending them to your board. So I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer to discuss the particulars of the codes in question today.
Thank you. So in the time between our last board meeting in September and our admin committee meeting, we were able to get a lot of work done with the plan sponsors. And so it looks like now we might have a resolution on all these pay codes. So I will briefly discuss what the issue was and how we see the matter moving forward for all, and then we'll talk about the recommendations with regard to these pay codes. So with regard to the night court pay, the issue or the concern, the legal concern at that time, or at the last board meeting, was that if you could change to the next slide, please, is that the plan sponsor was using the pay code differently for different classifications of people. There is the prohibition in the statute that says a prohibition or exclusion from compensation earnable for payments for additional services rendered outside of normal working hours. So the plan sponsor for court services specialists and collection specialists, they were using it within their normal working hours, adjusting their schedule for an 8-hour day, and so that would be pensionable. However, for the judicial courtroom assistants and interpreters, they were receiving the pay because they were working in addition to their regular 8-hour day, which would be a violation of the statute. So it was being used both ways, which we were calling mixed use, and that was the concern. So when we spoke with the court, we raised the issue, and they agreed to help us, or they agreed to go back and gather the data that would be able to substantiate the pensionability for those employees who were using that code or who got paid that code for their normal work hours. So the court has also submitted a request for a new pay code, and that new pay code will be used to designate hours that were pensionable or will be designated as a pensionable pay code. We don't yet have a name for that code, but they have submitted the request. And so the NC pay code would remain excluded because that will be for designating services performed outside of normal working hours. And the new code that they submitted will be included. And then they will work with the county to gather that data so that we can go back and address that issue for all our members, and the members who should receive the pensionable pay will. I'll stop right there for a second. Any questions on night court?
Any questions from the board?
Okay, turning to the cafeteria pays. Next slide, please. Turning to the cafeteria pays, this is the issue that's only with regard to our San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District employees, because they were the only ones that had this configuration of the cafeteria pays. And so the concern was that these pays were an Alameda exclusion. And so what we are referring to as an Alameda exclusion is the type of pay used to fund an in-kind benefit. And the California Supreme Court has decided that county plans must exclude these in-kind benefits from the pension calculation because the benefit is not permitted to be received by a member directly in cash, and therefore it is not considered compensation, as that term is defined by statute and case law. So when we talked to the district further about this issue, we learned that the part-time employees were not required to use the cafeteria pay for insurance coverages. So that would eliminate the concern or the legal concern about that pay not being compensation. But with regard to the full-time employees, next slide, please. They were being required to use that cafeteria pay as for these, what we're calling mandatory minimum coverages. So in their MOU, it states that the employee must, the employer provides a set amount per month, and then the employer provides that, and the employee then is required to use a portion of that amount at least to cover themselves for medical, dental, vision, and life insurance. So for example, the $955 per month, if the minimum coverage was going to cost $500, the remainder of that amount, the $455, could be received in cash by these employees. So it's the $500, the mandatory minimum coverage that can't be received in cash because it must be used for coverage. And so that's the exclusion. So we were able, in further conversations with the district, to be able to parse out that there is a portion of that that can be included as pensionable or remain included as pensionable, and a portion of that still must be excluded. So we will work with the district to have them submit, like the court did, a request for a new pay that will help to delineate or parse out the portion of the pay that can remain pensionable. And it's important to note, I think, on the last bullet point, so what we're doing here is will not be done on an individualized basis. So it will be based on what the mandatory minimum coverage or mandatory minimum coverage is for that particular classification. So if an employee uses more of the $955 because they want to cover their family members or take a different kind of health insurance that costs more, the only part that will be excluded is the mandatory minimum coverage, and that will be the same across the board per classification, as long as the mandatory minimum coverage is the same. Any questions with regard to cafeteria pays? Trustee Robinson, I think.
I can't see yet. Just go ahead and chat. I can't.
So simply because they must use a portion of that, that's the caveat there. That's what makes it to where it's no longer compensation earnable. Is my interpretation correct?
That it's no longer considered compensation because they don't have the ability to use it any other way.
Right.
That amount for anything else other than those mandatory minimum coverages. Yes.
Okay, because okay. So pretty much that's all these different in like subsection A, B, C, 2, and 3. That's pretty much all that stuff that it's describing in 31-461, right? Like that was pretty much where I was getting messed up last time because I was thinking it was saying it was compensable, but I think that's legitimately what would exclude it, right?
Well, so what we talked about was that this is the section before that, the 3.1, that defines what is compensation, that you have to first, an item of pay must first be compensation before it can even be evaluated to be included or excluded in compensation earnable, the 3.1.461 section. And so based on prior court's interpretations, and now the Alameda Court as well, saying that those kind of pays or those kind of benefits that cannot be received in cash, and when I say received in cash, meaning it can't be used any other way but for the benefit, in this case, the insurance premiums, that's not even compensation. So we don't even get to the 3.1.461 conversation because it doesn't meet the definition of compensation in 3.1.460.
And just to further elaborate on what Jennifer just said in response to Trustee Robinson's question. In that context, Trustee Robinson, it's only the portion of the benefit that's the mandatory minimum that would be non-pensionable. So the rest would be pensionable under this proposal.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, I'll move on to the field and detention training officers. So the concern with this pay initially was that field training officers and detention training officers were in a way like the night court. One was being given the pay for training during normal work hours, and one was being given the pay for training services rendered outside of normal working hours. But in talking to the department further, it appears that those, you can turn to the next slide, those two positions are using the code in the same way, and they're both using it in a way that would be that would not be excluded by the statute. It's not an ad hoc assignment. These are the officers who train new officers in both those areas. And this is what they do during their normal work hours. And they do this consistently so long as there are recruits to train. And so the concern we had seems to be alleviated by the conversation with the department. So next slide, please. So the two remaining pay codes will be canine care and bomb detail. And first I want to say, initially when we brought this to the admin committee, we had let them know that we had conversations with the county, and the county at that time was not willing to or interested in parsing out the pay or differentiating the pay like we are doing on the cafeteria and the night court. Since then, I've received communications from Union Council and from the county saying that they are actively working on addressing the issues raised by raised by Casera to address these legal impediments that we saw. Canine care, again, they have not, they're working on it. But in light of what we think that they are going to get to, we want to make sure that we're proactive and Casera is not switching back and forth when we have an anticipation that a different result will come about. But the canine care is still a mixed use, how we originally saw it. Based on the language of the MOUs, they clearly talked about the pay was for hours spent in home care, which would be consistent with the exclusion for services rendered outside of normal working hours. However, in talking to the department, it was clear that more goes into a canine officer's work with the canine officer as far as training and skills and a lot of work that's done during normal work hours. So there will be a portion of this pay, even I think as the work progresses with the county and the union, that the portion for home care will still need to be excluded. And so that's where our recommendation will remain the same with regard to LC pay. Next slide, please. But potentially there will be, if they are able to differentiate between the during normal work hours and the services outside of normal working hours, then we would handle it like the night court, where we would ask them to submit, they would need to submit a request for a new pay code that could then differentiate the work during normal work hours, which could then be pensionable. Any question with regard to canine care? Okay, turning to bomb detail. Next slide, please. Again, this is another one that the county and the union are working together on. Before Alameda, this pay, it's the LE pay, was designated as pensionable for both compensation earnable and our PEPR members, pensionable comp. We were recommending, because of the concern of this mixed use the department describing the use as, an incentive pay, potentially an availability pay, outside normal working hours, inside normal working hours, lots of uses. It appears that the work that they're doing may clarify, but bring clarity as to what the intention was for the BOM detail pay. And so we may not need to take any action different from how it was previously designated. But again, that will depend on how the union and the county finalizing their conversations to address our legal concerns. So next slide, please. And I think that addresses what I just spoke about. So getting to our recommendations. Specifically, with regard to the night court, still recommending that the portion used for services rendered outside of normal hours will be excluded. The newly requested pay code, which will differentiate and relate only to pay for services performed during normal work hours, we request that be designated as pensionable. Next slide, please. And with regard to the cafeteria pays, all of the part-time cafeteria pays, DB, DI, DJ, will remain pensionable, so no change. With regard to the cafeteria pays for full-time employees, DC, DE, DF, DS, that those would be excluded, but only to that portion relating to the mandatory minimum coverage. And again, we will have, with the help of the district, be able to have them submit a request for a new pay code, and where we can differentiate or pull out the amount that relates to the cash over and above the mandatory minimum that will remain pensionable. Next slide, please. So with regard to the safety pays, no change to the LF pay with regard to field and detention training officers is the recommendation based on our discussion with the department. This is where our recommendation changes a little bit just based on the new information that's come in since the posting of the agenda. We would still want to exclude the canine care, the LC pay at this point. And then if the county, if they reach a resolution whereby they can submit a new pay code for a portion of the canine care that can be pensionable, then we would ask for that pay code to be pensionable. Obviously subject to their final agreement and finalization by the Board of Supervisors. But with regard to BOM detail, I think we would ask to let that code remain status quo, allow it to stay currently as pensionable, obviously subject to the final decision by the union and the county to address the legal concerns we had with regard to that pay. And as just to note, it is not on this agenda, so we're not taking action on it, but just to note that I believe they're also addressing issues with regard to the SWAT pay. So as that changes, our staff will designate that accordingly if it addresses all of the legal issues, and then report back to your board on that issue. Those would be our recommendations on these pay codes. We have one more slide that just discusses new developments that your executive director was going to touch on, and then we would ask for a motion on staff's recommendations.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. So I think, I hope as your board can hear, there's been a lot of positive development on this because your board acted so decisively and with such clarity, and we laid out very clearly what the law says. Then the plan sponsors and the labor groups were able to get their heads together and make a plan that conforms to the law to treat our members fairly and salvage portions of the code that can be salvageable under the law. So we think that is a very positive development. So I did want to brief you on one other little unfortunate wrinkle that came up as staff dug deeper into this issue. What we learned is that these codes interact with each other, which might not be a terrible surprise. But what we learned was that sometimes when the FLSA code, which is overtime, a portion of the overtime may have been on other pay codes that were previously pensionable and are now not pensionable. So what we are required to do legally in cases where we find that is calling it rebucket it, move it to a different overtime bucket that is non-pensionable. Some overtime codes are pensionable. Other overtime codes are not pensionable. So where a portion of the code was in the regular pay that became part of the FLSA overtime calculation, we're having to rebucket a portion of that overtime to a non-pensionable overtime code, a different one. So we're not changing it we're not changing the nature of the code. We're moving it from one code to a different code because that's the most appropriate treatment under the law. So that's an unfortunate wrinkle that we uncovered as we dug deeper into the project. And I see Trustee Robinson has your hand up. Go ahead.
We had already approved that code, right? Wasn't that code ZZ or something?
Yeah, so ZZ is a code that has been in existence for a long time. It's a miscellaneous pensionable code. What we're talking about right now is not that. What we're talking about, one example is in a case where historically a VW code was used. A VW is overtime pensionable. Sometimes what we're having to do is rebucket that VW to VX, which is also overtime, but it's a non-pensionable overtime code. So there somewhat minimal impacts, but there is some impact there. And unfortunately, we just couldn't ignore it because it's not the right thing to do. The code is tied to the other code. These codes build on top of each other. And so because it was tied to a pensionable code that is no longer pensionable, we had to rebucket it to make it match.
And that has to do with scheduled overtime versus unscheduled overtime, correct?
Yes.
Scheduled overtime is still pensionable.
Yes, absolutely it is. Yeah, but if somebody got availability pay, then they got a overtime, an FLSA adjustment went on top of the availability pay. And so when we take away the availability pay, we have to rebucket the overtime that was the FLSA calculation that was associated with that pay code. So the other wrinkle that we uncovered is akin to that one. So once we dug into these codes really carefully, we found that in some cases, the plan sponsor had a code that they pay that is pensionable, but then they have an offset code. So a little quirk of county payroll mainframe, old 45-year COBOL system was that you can't put a positive and a negative in the same pay code. So the county created a different pay code in order to do an offset to the pensionable code. The problem was there were certain instances in which the offset code was a mismatch. It was not pensionable. So in other words, there's a pensionable code and then there's a non-pensionable offset. So we brought that issue to the attention of the county, and they are in the process of resolving that to make sure that there's an appropriate match where codes that are intended to offset other codes are either both pensionable or both not pensionable, so that the offset is actually effective. And that is a factor in retirement contributions, and also the ultimately the FAC that gets calculated as part of their retirement. So two little wrinkles we unfortunately uncovered. Both of them are being resolved. Just wanted to bring it to the attention of your board.
Okay. Any board member have any further questions? Excuse me, Trustee Robinson.
Oh, I thought you were about to call for the question. Sorry.
I got to go public comment next. All right, no discussion from the board. We'll open up to public comment. Any member of the public like to make a public comment on item 23? If you do, press *6 to unmute your phone. Okay, hearing none, we'll return back to the board. Or either further discussion or a motion on item 23. Trustee Robinson.
Trustee Robinson, motion to accept and approve recommendations from staff as well as the exclusions.
Okay. Motion by Trustee Robinson. Do I have a second?
Franny, second.
Thank you, Trustee Franny. Amy, do a roll call vote.
Dodgen,
Yes.
Franny, Brady,
Yes. Yes.
Gonzalez,
Yes.
Kaufman,
Yes.
Pratt, Pratt,
Yes.
thank you. Robinson,
Yes.
Skidmore,
Yes.
Whitesell,
Yes.
all ayes, motion pass.
Thank you. Ashley, I guess you guys are staying on for the next one then, I guess, aren't you? Okay, I was going to say thank you for coming, but I'm sure you're on for the next one. Item 24, presentation and update regarding implementation of Alameda decision presented by Executive Director Dominic Brown. Your presentation.
Thank you once again, Mr. Chairman. This is not an action item. Just wanted to brief your board on the different elements of the project now that we have a little bit more clarity on the pay codes. We're not completely done yet. We know there's new pay codes that will be created in the near future, but at least all of the codes that already existed, we now have clarity on, are very, very close with a couple of exceptions. So wanted to briefly run through this slide deck for your board as well as for our members, because they are the ones that are being impacted by these actions that staff is taking to implement the Supreme Court decision. So on slide, the first slide, 4 phases of the special code project. So the first phase is already done. That was your board resolution on August 24, 2020 with the effective dates. Stage 2 is now effectively complete. It's not quite done, but it's basically done. So we told your board from the beginning, we need clarity on these pay codes. Once we know exactly how these pay codes are designated, then we can chart a course for how we are going to actually work them and implement them at the detailed level with the individual impacts to the members based on the pay codes that are in their pay history. So phase 3 is kind of the next phase, and that's what I'm previewing right now for your board. We'll probably aim to take formal action perhaps as soon as next month, but that's refunds of contributions to active members. And we created a separate slide deck that I'm going to run through in detail after this one. That's actually the decision implementation, member impact with analysis of the 7 different unique cohorts that we have identified, because each one will have the law applied to them differently based on which sort of life cycle they are in, which cohort of membership. So phase 4 is probably months away. Phase 4 is what's going to happen when we get through phase 3. All of the money has gone out, all of the contributions have been refunded, all of the pensions have been reduced on a go-forward basis. And then what I believe we're going to need to do at that point is go to our actuary and have our actuary remeasure our liability and remeasure our assets. That's going to be very important when we go to do phase 4 and really evaluate the total impact to the plan of all of these actions, and then apply the IRS requirements as well as the California state requirements, which is part of why Rob Goss is here, is to kind of guide us and preview where we're going when we get to the full evaluation. We are hopeful that we will be able to get to a place where our funded ratio will not be significantly impacted by all of these actions. The reason why is because most of the time when a pension system makes a mistake, it's sort of one directional and it affects the assets, but it does not affect the overall accrued liability. This one is different because it does. It will affect the overall accrued liability of the entire plan. The entire actuarially accrued liability is actually going to come down. How much, we don't know yet. That's what we will need our actuaries to tell us, so that we can evaluate the net impact to the plan of all of these actions once they are taken. So that's sort of a preview of where we are going in the future. So the next slide, if you would please, Amy, put together a Venn diagram. So I wanted this partially for my own sanity, and I thought it would be worthwhile to share with everybody. So the green circle and the blue circle are related to the Alameda decision. The red circle actually is not. So the red circle is the project that we started over 2 years ago with doing the pay code cleanup. So we didn't even have a pay code policy until approximately 3 years ago. So before that, plan sponsors created their own codes. KSARA, even though the law said KSARA was responsible, KSARA didn't really fully embrace its responsibility to evaluate the pensionability of special pay codes. So we put in a new special pay code policy approximately 3 years ago, and then we started working on cleaning up all of the pay codes, especially the ones that were created between the time period of January 1st, 2013, when PEPRA went into effect, and up until the present at that time. So those are the red ones. So over the last couple of years, we have brought several batches of codes to your board to designate and to approve. And we did go forward changes, especially on contribution collection. But we told your board, well, we're going to wait and we're not going to do full retroactive application on these ones because we're waiting for the Supreme Court decision. And we don't want to make changes to a member account going one direction only to turn around and they pay us money, we turn around and give them money back. Or we give them money and say, oh, hey, sorry, now you owe us money. So that's why we sort of stacked all of these red ones. We set them to the side, waiting for the Supreme Court decision so that we could do full-scale implementation all at one time and keep it as clean as possible for our members. So that day has now come. It is here, and we are doing all of that implementation. So you can see the numbers here and how they interact with each other. Fortunately, I think we don't have any members that have PEPRA exclusions and Alameda exclusions and other pay code changes. That's where the red and the blue and the green intersect. Fortunately, those ones are zeros. We also don't have any Alameda exclusions and other pay code changes. However, in each of the other sphere subsections, you can see that there are members that fall into that category. And so, like I said, we developed this partially for our own sanity and to develop our work plan of exactly how we are going to do this in a logical and methodical manner. So I'll pause there for just a moment and see if there are any questions or comments so far. Okay, Juan, go ahead.
Wait, I think Juan's hand just went up.
Yeah, sorry. So just so I have a better understanding of the diagram. So with the green exclusions, the 2,749 that are active or deferred, just referring to those numbers. So then when it overlaps with the Alameda, so that would be the 49. So does that mean, is it an additional 49, or out of those 2,749, there's 49 that also have Alameda? Guess
each one is unique. 49 unique members have both PEPRA exclusions and Alameda exclusions. 2,749 have only PEPRA exclusions, but no Alameda exclusions.
Okay, so basically to get a picture of a grand total, it would have to be adding up each of those different.
Yes.
And
Yes, you would.
Okay.
Yeah, there's actually lots of ways to slice this. I mean, we could slice this and drill down by plan sponsor. We could slice it and drill down by employee group. There's lots of ways to slice and dice this data, but wanted to show it at a very high level just to wrap our heads around who is being impacted and where do they fall. Okay, so I'll move on to the last slide for this one, timing of impacts to members. So this is the go forward implementation with regard to the members that are having their pensions trimmed. So group A, we have 30 members with total retirement overpayments under $100 if done by October 31st. So basically, here's what's going on here. We analyzed all of the membership, and there are some people that have really, really large impacts. That's group B and group D. So there are 22 members with monthly pension reductions in excess of $500. That's a tragedy, but there's nothing we can do about that. We have to do it. Group D, there's an additional 28, $250 to $500. And so we're working those ones first so that we don't continue these overpayments, because it just makes it worse. And then they have to pay us back the additional overpayments. On the flip side, we have at the other end of the spectrum, some members have relatively small impacts. And we have a board policy that says that as long as the overpayment is less than $100, then we can write it off. So we're sort of fast tracking the largest impacts and sort of these smaller impacts at the same time, because it's more advantageous to the member. And so then we're kind of working two ends against the middle to all of the other members that have sort of in between impacts. The train's already left the station. They're going to have to pay us back some, but the impacts are not the largest ones. So that's our strategy for working these. It's probably not perfect, but we think it's a very reasonable plan, all things considered. So the goal right now is to complete cohort A and B in October, C and D in November, and E and F by December. So we actually have a plan in place. We might be able to finish all of this even before the end of the calendar year, which would be a tremendous accomplishment and speak volumes to the capabilities of our member services staff as well as our IT staff that is assisting them. So one other thing to note is that we imposed on ourselves a requirement that we give the members at least a month's notice, preferably 5 or 6 weeks, at least 4 weeks notice before we cut their pensions with the larger dollar amounts. So those letters are being generated right now, and those calculations are being done right now for the November pension payroll. So I wanted to bring that to the attention of your board. There is a formal notification process. Letters are going out to members with their unique information, their dollar amounts, over a month in advance so that they know and they're formally notified. Okay, I'll pause there for a minute before I jump into the unique situational analysis in the subsequent decks. Okay, very good. I will continue on then. So this is a separate slide deck that we put together. I have already presented this in an SEIU town hall, and it was well received. We also put this draft document on our website and made our members available that it was there so that they can start getting familiar with the different impacts. It is still in draft form. It is pending formal approval and execution probably by your board next month. But we needed to do this for our own sanity, frankly, and to communicate to our members how exactly all of this is going to play out. So Amy, go ahead and go to slide 2, if you would, please. So this is definitions of PEPR exclusions. Your board is familiar with that right now. So we'll skip slide 3. That's the definition of Alameda exclusions. Your board is already quite familiar by now. So slide 4 has the active and deferred members. So active and deferred members fall into 2 categories: not retired as of July 30 and not retired as of August 30 for Alameda and PEPRA exclusions respectively. So scenario number 1 is on slide 5. So KSERA plans to request plan sponsors seek taking contributions on the portion of contributions paid on mandatory minimum coverages for the RP pay as well as the mandatory minimum, which Jennifer just talked about in the last agenda item. So this is for the Alameda exclusions. I'll pause here for just a minute. Are there any questions on the Alameda exclusions and what we're going to do with those ones? Okay, good. So I'll move on to number 2. So active and deferred members with special pay codes that fall under PEPRA exclusions. We've already requested plan sponsors to seek taking contributions on these pay codes on a go-forward basis, and the Board of Retirement will consider whether such members are refunded contributions back to January 1st, 2013 with applicable interest, subject to final review and tax analysis. So one question that has come up in the past is, well, how will we do these refunds? Will we be issuing checks? Will we be doing rollovers? Will we be doing contribution refunds? How are we going to do that? So in consultation with tax counsel, and Rob Goss is here to further explain if there are any questions, what we're probably going to have to do is just cut checks and issue 1099s. The reason for that is because the law, the way that the Supreme Court has ruled on this with the PEPR exclusions, the legal framework says that they should have never been pre-tax in the first place because they were not pensionable pay codes in the past. The Supreme Court said that the PEPRA law, PEPRA legislation was effective January 1st, 2013. And so therefore these contributions were taken pre-tax in error. And so even though we might like to help our members by rolling them over, that means that those monies would be retaining their tax preferred status, which the IRS says is not appropriate because they should not have been taken pre-tax in the first place. So I have already talked with Liliana Fahel, who is with the 457 plan, because if I was a member and I got a chunk of money coming back to me that was pensionable, I might like to have the opportunity to recapture some of that tax benefit. And so potentially what they could do is increase their 457 contributions next year when we issue these refunds in order to recapture some of that tax benefit. So I'm not supposed to like be a tax planner. I'm a CPA, but not their CPA. I'm not their professional, financial advisor, but just I was trying to be creative in terms of how we can help our members. So I've asked Liliana Fahel if she would be available for our November meeting when we will discuss this in more detail and make herself available as a resource to our members. So wanted to address that. If there's any questions from the tax side, Rob might be able to offer some comments there, or perhaps Ashley as well, but that is our working plan at the moment. Okay, very good. I will move on then. So next we turn our attention to retired members. Retired members fall into one of 5 categories. So if they retired before January 1st, 2013 on slide 8, please, Amy, no impact. No impact. They got out the door before any of this was effective. If they are retired and they retired before 1/1/13, no impact. So that is good news for them. So moving on to slide 9, for members that retired during the window between January 1st, 2013, but prior to July 30, 2020 with Alameda exclusions in their FAC period. No impact on any members as to the Alameda exclusions. However, these members might be impacted if their FAC contains PEPRA exclusions. So the reason for that is because Alameda was a change in law effective 7/30/20. Alameda decision was upheld the change in law for the PEPRA exclusions that was effective January 1st, 2013. So that is why they are being treated differently. Ashley, did I say that right? I said that right? Okay, good. Good. So I will keep going to slide 10 and scenario number 5. So this is
muted, Dominic, but I nodded affirmative.
I saw. We're good. Okay, so slide 10, scenario number 5. This is for members retired on or after January 1st, 2013, but prior to August 30, 2020 with PEPRA exclusions in their highest final average compensation period. So KSARA must adjust monthly pension benefits effective to reflect the FAC without the PEPRA exclusions in their special pay codes. So what we're going to try to do to help them, our system does it automatically. We will take those special pay codes out of their FAC. Then our system will see if we can find them a better FAC during a different time period that may not have included these pensionable pay codes. Perhaps there are other pay codes that are still pensionable. We will try to find them a higher FAC before we recalculate their pension and cut their pension going forward. KSARA must also collect any pension overpayments only back to August 30, 2020. There might be additional overpayments. We are going to save those for phase 4. For phase 3, we're only going to go back to August 30, 2020. And again, the Board of Retirement will consider whether to refund erroneously collected contributions net of pension overpayments with applicable interest at a future date. So there will be some opportunity for offset. Based on California law, we can only go back and collect 3 years of overpayments. So I'm calling all of that phase 4. We have a lot of other things we need to do first. Then we'll evaluate these impacts, evaluate the offsets, and put together a plan. We are hopeful that we will not need to collect any pension overpayments for any retirees prior to August 30, 2020. However, we have to do the financial analysis in order to justify that action. So that is what we are hoping to be able to do, but the numbers will tell us whether or not we can do it when we get to phase 4. I'll pause there for a moment. Any questions? Okay, I'm not seeing any, so we'll carry on to our last two scenarios. So scenario 6 is for members retired on or after 7/30/2020 with Alameda exclusions in their highest final FAC. So keep in mind that number 6 and number 1 go together. So they were active prior to 7/30/2020, but maybe they retired after 7/30/2020 during this period of time right now where there's still a little bit of lack of clarity regarding the codes and exactly where everything is going to land. So if somebody is in situation 6, they are also by definition in scenario 1 and will handle their active contribution refunds and any potential pension overpayments during this time of uncertainty sort of separately, but in conjunction with each other. So KSARA still must adjust the monthly pension effective 7/30/2020, taking out the FAC that relates to the portion with the mandatory minimum coverages, again, discussed in the last agenda item. Must also collect any applicable pension overpayments back to July 30, 2020, and then we'll sort of figure out the rest later with any offset as part of phase 4. The very last scenario, scenario 7, which is tied to scenario 2, members retired on or after August 30 with PEPRA exclusions, KSARA must adjust monthly pension payments effective 8/30/2020 to reflect an FAC without the PEPRA exclusions, collect any applicable pension overpayments back to 8/30/2020, and then we'll figure out the rest of the offset later during phase 4. That's a lot. Slide 13. Any questions? And you can stop screen share and bring it back to the board. Okay, so this is very, very complex, as you can see. We spent a lot of time putting this together for our own sanity so that we understand what all the moving parts are, which scenarios will have which implementation applied to them. But we produced this document. Ashley signed off on it. She said we did it right, so that's good news. And we think it is beneficial for all of us. So that does conclude my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Any member of the board have any questions? Trustee Gonzalez.
Yeah, so I know you kind of went over the timeline when we went over like, A, B, C, D, E, like and having it done by the end of the year. Just the calculations, or is that actually having everything like as far as being paid out or having started negotiations for members to recoup payments or anything like that? What does that mean?
Yeah, negotiations for repayments, I'd say that's going to spill over into the future. Our goal by December 31 is to recalculate the pensions, and in cases where we are required to reduce those pensions on a go-forward basis. Then we will start repayment agreements for anybody that may have been received overpayments in the meantime. As for contribution refunds, our focus is really on the retirees first and the pension payments. My goal is actually to issue those refunds at the end of January 2021 or maybe February for 3 reasons, I think. 1, we definitely want to focus on the retirees first. Number 2, if we do it in that particular time frame, they will get interest posted, so they will get a little bit more money coming back to them. And number 3, if those payments are issued in 2021, that gives them a whole year in order to potentially recapture some of the tax benefit.
Okay, thank you.
Any other board member have any questions? Okay, I will open up to public comment. If you would like to make a public comment, press *6, unmute yourself, state your name. Do you have any member of the public that would like to make a public comment on this item 24? Okay. Hearing none, I will return back to the board. Any further discussion from the board? This is just to hear a presentation, so I do not need a motion. Okay. Well, Robert and Ashley, thank you for televisiting us today from home,
Nice to see you
or wherever
all.
you're at, office.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That, I will move to item 25, adjournment. This meeting's adjourned.